thinking about Kip Fulbeck in Nishime's text and thinking about, well, what is his particular vision for this Hapa project? Well, first off, let's think about what Hapa actually refers to. It comes from Hawaii originally. It's a term that in Native Hawaiian originally means half, right? And it actually, as it first arrives, it's a derogatory term in implications, hapa haole, which means it's making fun of those people who are half Native Hawaiian and half white in the time period of the 19th century, when you have more children who are multiracial at the time. So it's something that's used to denigrate the people who are not quote-unquote pure Hawaiian. Also, because of its closeness to Japanese in terms of a anglicized term for half in Japanese, which is hafu, it sort of kind of also gets merged into that particular understanding of where hapa comes from. So it's in some ways, right, for Japanese Americans, something that is, because you have the actual syllables ha and pa in Japanese, you can actually use that, and it makes sense to multiracial Japanese. So some people believe that it's actually much more Japanese in origin than just Native Hawaiian. But its clear origins do come from Hawaii. And for someone like Kip Fulbeck in the 1980s and 1990s originally, and then obviously into 2000s, it's something that's slowly become reclaimed as a marker of a positive identity, something that is sort of both claiming and identifying as multiracial, but specifically multiracial Asian. And recognizing that element of their particular identity, but something that's not specifically quote-unquote 100% Asian. So this is the idea of where 100% Hapa has emerged in the last 10, 15 years. The problem, of course, is that this is not something that's universally accepted by all multiracial Asians or even Native Hawaiians. And some Native Hawaiians have actually challenged this particular use of the word Hapa as being typically appropriative of Hawaiian culture to claim something as part of Asia, an Asian American identity that really is only, specifically should refer to a Native Hawaiian identity. So again, there's this linguistic debate that takes place amongst, people who believe that Hapa is actually more reflective of a colonial settler identity in Hawaii rather than something that is truly, kind of liberatory for Asian Americans or multiracial Asian Americans. So again, this is not universally accepted. So some people who are multiracial Asian have, because of their particular awareness and understanding of Hawaiian culture and history and its particular, conflicts with the United States, refuse to use the word Hapa in terms of that is to kind of, again, of a colonial history that reminiscent of a colonial history that they want to reject. This is not a problem for Kip Fulbeck, however. And so Kip Fulbeck is, again, one of these early in the 1990s, really, when he starts to do his graduate work. And he emerges primarily as a visual artist and performing artist. So when he starts his work as an academic, he explores his own identity as being quote-unquote Hapa. And he actually didn't use the word Hapa. He was looking for a way to think about himself as multiracial Asian. He grows up as the only multiracial child in his entire family. His mother, who is Chinese, has a family. He has siblings who are 100% Chinese, but when his mother's first husband dies, she remarries someone who becomes Kip's father, who is a Caucasian. And so in the entire family, he's both the youngest by considerable age, by like 10, 15 years, and also the only multiracial child in the entire family. So, the only one who is not quote-unquote 100% Chinese. So this particular experience is something that informs his early work, and his first video is called Banana Split, which he, again, merges sort of the visual sort of expressions, but also because he is an experimental poet, he recites his poetry over this particular video as well. And this is a way that he starts to examine his Hapa identity. For those of you who are interested, this particular video of Banana Split is in the CSULB library. I'm not asking you to watch it because it's a little bit long and it's a little bit funky in some ways. So it's something that if you're interested in, I highly suggest that you watch it, but it is not something I'm requiring for this particular class. But it also reflects, I think, his early explorations of trying to come to grips with some sense of his both Chinese ethnicity and his quote-unquote white Caucasian ethnicity, especially growing up. again, this remains a particular concern for his work and research, so much so that, again, he started to think about, well, what does it mean to actually be, quote unquote, marginal, and can they actually be mainstream Asian Pacific Americans? And again, part of what we can think about is how his more recent work has actually started to challenge the idea that Hapas are in fact on the margins of Asian Pacific Americans, that they're in fact really at the centerpiece of an Asian Pacific American community in the 21st century, right? They're going to be eventually a much more significant population. So how do multiracial Asian Americans start to see themselves as not just being kind of, the outsider in the larger Asian Pacific American community, but really a vital part of that Asian Pacific American community? And so he begins with this 2004 HOPA project, where he goes to various cities in the United States and asks individuals to, both pose for a picture and describe themselves on a single sheet of paper, and identify and describe what it means to be, Hapa. This is something that he follows up with another project 10 years later, which is a PDF article that I'm asking you to read for this week, because it provides a different perspective. It provides that kind of reflection back upon this original project in 2004 by some participants, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But what becomes that HOPA project gets published in this book, Part Asia 100% HOPA. And here are some of the examples. Again, Nishimei also provides some of these examples in her text as well. And you can see that, they sort of, because they are of various ages, various experiences, various ethnicities, that they come across with different experience and different articulations of what it means to be quote unquote Hapa, or what their own life is like, right? So it's not even the idea that they're being proscribed, they're being told what to write. They're simply creating and coming up with their own articulations of their identity. And you can see how much they change, in terms of, the very, very kind of older, sort of mature person who is, 100% black, 100% Japanese, versus a very little boy in 5th grade that has no friends, right, who doesn't really integrate this idea of race in his particular articulation, but the idea that maybe he has no friends is part of that narrative as well. So one of the things I want you to think about as we go and you do the reading for the 10 Years Later project, which is, again, separate PDF file. It's fairly short. It has interviews with original subjects from this Part Asia 100% HOPA publication. And you can see this is one of the individuals who's appears in that original book and also provides her a longer narrative. And so one of the things I want you to think about as you're reading this PDF article is thinking about, well, how did they start to articulate their identities and their experiences in 10 years in hindsight of this original project? And again, aside from the fact that they have a larger format to discuss this, right? They don't simply have this single sheet of paper that they can write down these kind of pithy comments, but also think about how much does their own thinking of what it meant to be multiracial Asian evolve over those 10 years, and how much did this particular project actually contribute to that articulation of and re-articulation and development and evolution of the way they thought about what it meant to be multiracial Asian in 2014. So this is part of the question I want you to think about as you review this again, and in reflection to what Nishimei is talking about in her text, because again, she's looking at it from a very, very specific point in time where the only thing that exists are these photographs and really short kind of lists of how people identify themselves in 2004. And so as a discussion question, again, as a way to think about and wrap up this entire text, is to think about this idea of visibility of multiracial Asian Pacific Americans, and also Asian Pacific Americans in general within popular culture. And thinking about specifically, and there's again a more elaborate setup in terms of the discussion board question, but this is the question that's on the discussion board. So I want you to reflect upon contemporary Asian Pacific American popular culture. And again, this is in kind of ways of thinking about the paper that you're going to be writing. So we're not talking about news media, right? We're not talking about what people show on the news, but really thinking about how they're portrayed in things like Hollywood films, in television, and even things like literature, right? In terms of creative literature, like fiction, what have you, if you do delve into that idea. But think about this idea of multiraciality, and is it presented as this kind of racial utopia? Is this something that people see as, oh yeah, multiracial children are kind of normal, and sort of this idea of a more enlightened society? And if that's the case, well, then how does that compare to the idea that, well, in the United States, even as we speak today, the notion of immigration and that fear of what immigration will do in terms of changing the face of the United States, is that still, how does that kind of coexist with each other, right? The idea that we're not necessarily in a United States that fully embraces all immigration, all multiracial unions, right? All multiracial children, right? The idea that, right, anti-miscegenation is still only, 50 years in the past for the United States, right? 1967 is when, Levy v. Virginia is actually passed. So we're still only 50 years into a United States where multiracial marriages or interracial marriages are actually legal in the United States, in all 50 of the United States. Is it still frowned upon? Is it still looked upon? So this is what I want you to think about. Is this something that's actually reflected in the popular culture of 2016? That this is the way we think about, multiracial children, and is it something that is, a great future, or is it something that's still treated with hesitance? So that's the discussion question. Again, be as specific as possible, point to specific portrayals. And again, this is a way to start thinking about not only the things we've already discussed in previous weeks, but also how this might shape your ideas and your responses to your own papers. So that's it for this week. So there's several things you have to do for this week. First, don't forget you have to watch the online videos from Kip Fulbeck. There are 2 separate ones that you want to watch. Don't forget that there is a separate reading aside from chapters 5, 6, and 7 from Nishia May's book. This is a really short Hapa project 10 years later. Again, it is just to pay attention and think about how these people reflect upon their experiences after being in that original book. Write your response to the discussion questions. There is a quiz this week. And also, don't forget, you have to begin drafting ideas for your paper. So this is a pretty full week with a lot of things that you have to cover. So, get to it. Again, obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. And again, good luck. I'll talk to you in next week.